Well, hello. How is everyone doing this evening? So excited to be here to talk about something that's probably not as exciting to so many people, but super excited to be here. Thank you to Catherine and the Bridge Club for having me talk about this very important topic here this evening. Catherine, how are you?
I'm doing well. I got a little hidden there. We're still learning the new platform, so at least we're getting that part figured out. So I made the statistic 1 in 5 veterinary professionals are currently facing cyberbullying. Can we start with a little bit of the lay of the land? What is cyberbullying and where is it coming from?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think oftentimes cyberbullying is confused with just anyone who goes online and leaves a negative review for a practice. And there are some real distinct differences between cyberbullying and the occasional client who, in some cases, right, not every case, and we'll talk about this, has the opportunity to go online and express a grievance with the world, right? And so the difference here is, a negative review and an unhappy client is someone who just goes online. Maybe they've said something, hopefully that is factual about an experience that they've had in your practice that unfortunately didn't go as planned. And so whether we'd like to admit it or not, in those instances, there might have been a failure in protocol. We might have taken a little bit longer to call a client back. But for whatever reason, the client has the right to say what they're saying. And it might just be that the practice doesn't particularly like that and want everyone to see it. So that's a negative review. That's someone who is within their right to do that.
It still hurts, though. I'm not going to lie, right? That hurts.
It really does, Catherine. And I've had it happen to me once, and I'll certainly share that story a little bit later. But it does hurt. And as much as I tell practices, we need to brush it off, and we'll talk about that when we get into solutions, it still stings. It's either about you, it's about a baby that you've built, which is your practice, and it stings. But then there's a distinct difference between someone who then ultimately goes online, says something about your practice that perhaps isn't factual, maybe a statement or a review that's riddled with lies. But then they don't just leave one negative review on Google, or they don't just air their grievance in the form of a Facebook recommendation, or even just tag you on Instagram and air their frustrations. They proceed to do this consistently across multiple channels. So maybe they say something on Google, and then they go on Facebook and they leave you a recommendation for people not to come to your practice. And then they go ahead and they tag you in a post on Facebook, and they just continue to bully you, to say things that maybe aren't true about you and become aggressive. And that is what a cyber bully is. And that's the core of what we'll focus on tonight. And certainly we'll talk about the client who goes online and says things that are not so nice, but there are differences in cyberbullying versus the client who's upset online.
So what you're saying is there is always a false truth in the cyberbullying, whereas there are instances, of course, where a situation may be being reported appropriately, but the person who is doing the post now is taking it so far as to cause harm.
That's exactly it. It becomes more of an attack to try to bring the business down, or try to ultimately, we've seen some pretty aggressive things where they start to act by requesting for violence to happen to people. And so again, whether it was true or not, it at some point gets into a bullying phase, which then becomes dangerous.
So let's talk about some real life scenarios that you've witnessed where this behavior has gotten a little out of control. And I know we're going to talk also about another kind of cyberbullying here in a minute, but I do want to make sure we're really clear in our mind on this particular side of cyberbullying.
Yeah, so I have probably one of the most memorable experiences that have ever occurred to a practice that I know and work with, and one that even till this day, to some regard, haunts me. But has in turn, I look at it more as an opportunity to share with others about not only how horrible the situation was, but where the practice is at today. So I have a practice about maybe 2 years ago that just signed an agreement to work with us. The practice had just invested millions of dollars in a renovation of a new expansion in their practice. They were working with a business consultant. They knew that they needed to start to work toward building business to pay off this large loan that they just occurred. And I was getting ready to unplug, which is something that I do a few times a year, where I don't go on technology. I don't check emails. I don't use my phone. We live like the cavemen used to live back in the day. And I totally abandoned technology, and only very few people are able to get a hold of me. So I went on my digital sabbatical, and I received a call from one of my employees. Now, I've taken digital sabbaticals for years, and never has anyone from my practice called me to bring something to my attention. They really solved these issues themselves. And what ended up happening was this new practice owner had a pet owner who went online. And the backstory there is the practice is in a very rural part of a state. And to keep everything anonymous, I won't mention where they're at, but very, very rural community. They treat all kinds of animals, including farm animals. They will occasionally dehorn goats, which is something that I, even in my years in veterinary medicine, had not been familiar with. But essentially, apparently what happens is you dehorn baby goats, and you do so for a variety of reasons. This particular owner was having their goats dehorned because they don't want their goats to get wrapped up in the wiring that they have in their farm. Apparently, goats can get their horns caught in there, and it can cause distress and ultimately kill the goat. And so they were having 6 or 7 of their goats, young goats, dehorned. This is a service that the practice is used to offering, and they've done it on numerous occasions. This owner apparently had never had this service done. And if anyone knows anything about dehorning, as I learned, is essentially you put a burner on the horn of a goat. And you only do it for a few seconds at a time. And ultimately, I guess you dehorn the goat that way. And so this owner had watched this being done with about 3 of her goats. By the time it came to her 4th goat, the goat started to resist. It wasn't really tolerating it well. The goat urinated on itself, and this was causing distress to the owner of these goats. She had already shown some signs of distress of watching this happen to the first 3, not knowing what to expect, despite the fact that the owner had already explained what to expect. So by this time, when the 4th goat really started to become anxious and it urinated on itself, she was extremely upset. She grabbed that goat out of the veterinarian's hand, she loaded them up, and she left. And again, if you know anything, there needs to be a course of antibiotics and a topical treatment to prevent infection, of which she did not obtain. And so she left, and she took pictures of one of her goats and the burn on the area where the horn should have been. And she said that the veterinarian tortured all of her goats. And there was a picture of a goat that after about 2 days started experiencing issues because it had not had their antibiotics or any of their pain treatment or topical treatment, and was laying down, most likely very ill as a result of this. And so she took a picture of it, and she called him a goat killer. And she said that no one should ever go to this practice. And if that weren't bad enough, she shared tons of images. To remind you, this is a rural community. There may be about 2,000 to 3,000 people. Comments, 670 shares, and tons more people that reacted to the photos, as well as the additional comments and the additional shares. So in my experience, when you look at something with 670 shares, we're talking over 100,000 people easily in a community that only has 2,000 to 3,000 people. Well, it was distressing enough to the local community that people were calling to cancel their appointments. And one of the reasons I'm really excited that Lisa's here is that to talk about is the emotional aspect of this. And what was happening is the employees of the practice were becoming emotionally distressed. When they would go out to town to the grocery store, there would be people that come up to them knowing the individual works at the veterinary practice, and they would say, "Is it true? What are you doing? Why do you work there?" And they were attacking those employees. The comments got even really nasty, and there are screenshots that I have where people were wishing the death of this veterinarian. But the most emotional aspect of that entire experience for me It was when I talked to the veterinarian. I, of course, plugged in. I called the veterinarian, and he was, they have 2 locations, not too far from each other. And he was at a location where he was practicing by himself that day. And he went in his office and he closed his door, and he said, Eric, am I going to be okay? And I said, absolutely, you're going to be okay. And then there would just be silence, and I would ask him questions and he wouldn't respond. And then he would just ask me again, am I going to be okay? And he's crying. And I'm listening to this, and I just keep on telling him, like, it's going to be okay. And he kept on referencing the bills that he has to pay, and the fact that he needed to grow, and his employees are upset. People are canceling appointments. And he kept on asking me that question over and over again. And I was so afraid that after telling him it was going to be okay and explaining what we were going to do, which we'll talk about later, I called his wife and I said, he shouldn't be on the floor practicing right now. And she said, well, what's going on? And I explained to her the situation. And so she immediately called, and she had a relief vet come in. But for me to hear this, for that silence to occur, for him to keep on asking if I'm going to be okay, I knew that this was taking such an emotional toll on him. And in the profession that we live in, or that we all work in, we know the rates of suicide. We know everything that's going on. I was probably shooken to my core. Eventually talked to numerous people in his practice, and we handled the situation, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But that's cyberbullying, right? When there are so many people who are really working toward trying to bring this veterinarian down. And I say so many people because it wasn't just the person who shared this. It was everyone else who shared it, calling for action, calling for people to cause harm on this veterinarian. And that's cyberbullying. That's different than someone who goes online and who's just upset about a call that came too late, or about someone who didn't provide them the service. And there's a very distinct difference in how we handle both of these. Both are very important, but that's an example of the type of cyberbullying that we're really referring to here tonight.
This is just heart-wrenching, and we're going to, in a moment or two, break out in the tables where you all can also share your own stories, because we know that is unfortunately and sadly not a singular incident. I do want to quickly understand, though, has it gotten worse over time? Because with the pandemic in particular, so can you give us a little bit there? And then can we then we'll jump over to the other form of bullying that's also occurring. But I just want to, before we jump over to the tables, because I want to be sure we get people time.
Yeah, absolutely. So since the pandemic has happened, first and foremost, a lot of practices don't realize that there were 11.38 million US households that have welcomed a pet since the pandemic occurred, which we're looking at back in February. So the reason that so many practices are extremely busy, it has to do with in many cases, inefficient workflow of curbside service, but it also has to do with the fact that we are bursting at the seams. So many practices have wait times where pet owners need to wait 1, 2, 3 weeks for an appointment. And so what we're actually seeing is a accumulation of inefficiencies during curbside and lack of patience that is contributing to an uptick in negativity that's occurring right now online, whether it's Google, whether it's Facebook, Yelp, or anywhere else. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that long-term employees at pet owners at many veterinary practices are upset because they want to be seen this Friday, and they're normally used to being seen Friday, or when they call for an appointment, only waiting a day or two, but now they're having to wait a week. And so they're upset about that. They feel like their veterinary practice is not there for them. Many pet owners are not getting the same value via curbside as well, which, by the way, is an entirely different conversation, which we can spend on an hour about. We can go on for an hour about. But what we're seeing is our pet owners who are not receiving the same value. So they're paying for services, but they're not getting that interaction with the veterinarian that they're normally used to getting. So there's a disconnect in perception of value, and we're seeing even more of those reviews coming in. And the fact that pet owners themselves are overstressed and overworked and have a lot of reasons to be worried. Certainly we in the profession are bursting at the seams with business. We're working our tail off. I say we're working. I'm working from home as a consultant. It's really you, the audience, the people who are on the front lines, working in a practice, getting there early, leaving really late, working consistent shifts. You yourself worrying about your health and your safety during this pandemic, on top of making sure that pets receive the care that they need. But our pet owners too have worries. We know that something like 52% of pet owners are worried about finances in the upcoming year and don't have financial certainty. We know that pet owners are losing their jobs. Our pet owners are flight attendants for airlines. Our pet owners are other workers that are being furloughed or laid off. And so they have their stresses on top of that. And so maybe their patience isn't what it used to be. And a lot of that is really just kind of bursting up to really this perfect storm for pet owners to then go online and start attacking. So we are seeing more negativity online occur than we ever had in the past.
So are we also seeing it amongst ourselves? So we quickly touch on that, and then I want to send everyone off to their tables. But let's talk. You wrote an incredible article that we will also send out to every attendee about what's happening within the profession.
Yeah, so we're talking about mostly tonight pet owners that are attacking veterinary professionals online. But the article that you're referencing that we'll send everyone is around this personal problem that I think we need to face in our profession. And that is, we're not just getting bullied by pet owners, we're getting bullied by one another. And for me, it's really disheartening to see that. This is a profession I grew up in, I love so dearly. And to already know the stressors that most veterinary practices and veterinary professionals face, to then go on somewhere like Facebook and peek at certain groups or even see in public postings where people will go online and they will verbally attack other veterinary professionals. They'll attack a professional that's down the street from them that practices medicine in a way that's different, but they want to bring that colleague down. Or they'll attack another veterinary nurse or another veterinary receptionist. I've seen an uptick in Instagram channels that are geared toward just spreading hate against other veterinary professionals, wanting to bring leaders down, wanting to bring their peers down, blatant attacks, telling people that their work ethics are not the same. And I've been seeing so much of that lately, and unfortunately have many of my colleagues and friends that many people know that are out there that are speaking, that are working with practices that have been attacked. And it's just gut-wrenching. It's horrible. And I want to tell veterinary practices professionals, if you see a colleague or someone else that is being attacked on social media, it is important to leave that post alone and to say enough already, because you contributing to that just adds more fuel to the fire. And it's really a growing problem in the profession. And I don't want to see us implode. I don't want to see us tear each other down. I'd rather see us inspire one another. If we have a grievance about someone, handle it offline, talk to that person. It takes more courage to face that person and have a real conversation with them than to passively aggressively target them online. And so I really want to make sure that we are looking out for each other and that we say enough already and that we don't tolerate cyberbullying within our profession.
I think that is and we have the post here, it's time we have each other's backs, and I absolutely concur with that.